What's the last thing you got in your notes there, Mackenzie? So that's right, we weren't together yesterday. The last thing we have is the Great Society, right? The Great Society. What's so great about it? Well, that's what the people on the left side of the aisle were asking. If it's a great society, America, the most prosperous country, greatness would be that everyone would be able to enjoy the fruits of all of that prosperity and freedom. So there is the war on poverty. That's the biggest part of this great society. That's where most of the money was spent, trying to eradicate poverty. I don't think anybody's against that idea. The problem, again, is how. How do we go about it? Okay, Civil Rights Act of 1964. Remember the two major themes we've been talking about the last 2 weeks. Cold War and 3 weeks, actually. Civil rights, right? These things continue from the 50s into the 60s. So July of 1964, there is the Civil Rights Act that was passed by Congress. And this is, again, 99 years after the Civil War. At least legally, we're finally getting it right. America is finally living up to the promise that is in the Declaration and Constitution for all people, no matter the shade, no matter how much melanin is in your skin. That should matter not. We're all brothers and sisters. Outlaw discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, or sex. And back then, they didn't have to think about, is it sex or gender? It was because it was just common sense, right? It was an era of common sense. I mean, there were people that were evil and racist, and we're learning about that. They didn't want to let go of the Civil War. But when it came to things like biology, there was common sense and actual biological facts. We didn't live by how everybody felt. So it was illegal from 1964 on anywhere in the country, no matter what the state of Mississippi tries to say, because the federal law trumps the state laws. As long as the federal law, if the U.S. Constitution is followed, and the Supreme Court says it's not an unconstitutional law, then the federal law trumps the state law. And that was kind of the big deal about the South, not wanting to give in to the federal law. There were, believe it or not, some people that actually weren't racist, but yet still supported Mississippi being able to do what Mississippi wanted to do. That, like, how do you even do that? Because in a situation like what was going on, like, how do you, what it happened? Then we got this. So we're going back and forth between what's going on in the world, what's going on here at home. The Cold War, the focal point of the Cold War has become a place called Vietnam. We talked last week about Dien Bien Phu, right? Everything changed with Dien Bien Phu, 1955, where the rebels took over and the French were out, right? So now we've got this big situation just off the coast of Vietnam in the Gulf. The Gulf was called the Gulf of Tonkin. In America is wondering, what do we do here? It's August 1964. We've had many advisors in Vietnam. We want to secure Vietnam for freedom's sake. We don't want the Soviets to be able to keep supplying the communist people of Vietnam, the North, to go in and take over the South. We at least wanted to preserve the southern part of this nation we call Vietnam. So the Congress gives the president authority to pursue military action in Vietnam. Congress didn't declare war on Vietnam. Our Constitution, Drew, says that only Congress can declare war. Does that make sense, Noel? The founders didn't give the power to a president to declare war. Why? I'll answer it. Because we didn't want power invested in one person like that, right? That was the whole point to getting rid of the king, to have a republic. We don't want one person to be able to say, all right, we're taking this country into war. No, if you do something that serious, we want a wide range of views from all regions of the country, all of these representatives and senators that go to meet in Washington. The point is to our republic is they collectively make that decision. That way, it's not based on one person. That's the way it's supposed to work. Well, things start to change here in Korea and now Vietnam. It's like Congress is like abdicating their responsibility. Okay, President, if you need some, look, they give him, there's really hardly any limits here. What happens in Vietnam, we call it the Vietnam War, but guess what? Again, it's one of those arguments not worth having, but it's not officially a war. Congress never declared war. Who are we declaring war on? We would have to declare war on like what? The North Vietnamese or you know, you're not going to declare war on the Soviet Union. We're trying to like get through this without actually fighting against the Soviet Union, right? But they give the president these broad powers. And that's going to lead to further escalation into the war.
I'm ready to earn my master's in healthcare, but I need to school that understands my schedule. WGU GenSet, accredited on
Western Governors University.
That's essentially what the goal of.
All right. Now you're going to get a perspective here. Things are going on in Vietnam that we are very uneasy about because we're trying to stop the spread of communism, right? So the perspective you're going to hear is held by a lot of people like, did we kind of want something to happen so that we get involved? So listen for that perspective as you hear this guy's breakdown.
Blame it on the other guy. That's essentially what the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution did to the United States and Vietnam. When Lyndon Johnson became the U.S. president after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, he was committed to carrying on many of Kennedy's policies. LBJ was especially interested in escalating the fight against communist insurgents in Vietnam. Johnson had made Vietnam a priority for his presidency, and it was a war he did not want to lose. And another thing, the 1964 election was just around the corner. Johnson's Republican challenger, Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, was attacking the incumbent for being soft. Johnson also knew the American public wouldn't go for an unprovoked military attack by the U.S. So he needed an excuse, some reason to rally the troops. Johnson got his excuse on August 2nd, 1964. A U.S. Navy destroyer, the USS Maddox, was cruising the waters of the Gulf of Tonkin, a body of water located off the coast of northern Vietnam. The Maddox was engaged in an intelligence collection mission. Reportedly, 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats appeared out of nowhere and fired on the Maddox unprovoked. The Maddox wasn't harmed in the attack and called in an airstrike to help the boats. Another destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, was sent in to support the Maddox. And on August 4th, there was supposedly a second incident involving North Vietnamese boats attacking the American ships. The reports were a bit hazy at the time, and no one was quite sure what had happened. LBJ and his aides wasted no time in using the incidents to gin up support for increased military involvement in Vietnam. And at the time, no one in the news media questioned the legitimacy of information from the White House, especially when it came to national security. On August 7, 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was put before Congress. Both houses passed it overwhelmingly. The wording of the resolution was pretty broad. It read, Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. In practical terms, you can do pretty much whatever you want over there, Mr. President. And he did. Johnson crushed Goldwater in the 1964 presidential election. And the U.S. involvement in Vietnam quickly escalated from just advising South Vietnamese allies to a full-scale open war, a war that lasted for over a decade. 6 years after passing the resolution, Congress would have voters' remorse. LBJ was out of office, and Richard Nixon was president. The American body count in Vietnam continued to rise, and popular support for the war continued to fall. So at the end of 1970, Congress said, we're repealing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It was too late to affect the events in Vietnam. That ship had sailed. But it did signal that Congress was no longer keen on giving any American president free rein to wage war. The passage and repeal of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution paved the way for the 1973 War Powers Act. That legislation set limits on what presidents could do militarily without congressional approval. It was a direct rebuke to the broad powers Congress had granted the president with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution.
All makes sense? So the way the Constitution is set up, the Congress has to declare war. Well, Congress wasn't ready to declare war, but they did want to do something about the spread of communism. So they gave the president these powers. Hey, do what you got to do. Well, it led to 10 years of war. We're so deep in this now, and all of these American sons and fathers are coming home in caskets. We want to make sure in the future we never give a president that much power and leeway again. So they passed a new law that we'll talk about in 73. Questions, comments? So this war you've heard about most of your life, the Vietnam War, is now going to begin for America in earnest. All right. The election of 64 and the Vietnam escalation. As they said in the video, President Johnson, who's been president just about a year in the election of 1964, is going to crush Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater gets labeled as an extremist. And there was a little button in that video that you didn't have time to read. But Goldwater gave a speech once, and Goldwater's from the South. And he gave a speech about, being extreme in the defense of liberty is no vice. A vice is like a bad thing you do. If you have vices, they're like bad habits, okay? So his speech, they took it out of context, the media and the Democrats, and they said that, Goldwater said there's no vice in being extremist. Well, one thing that a lot of people in America don't like to be called is an extremist. Extreme this or extreme that. We like to think of ourselves, just like economically, everybody likes to think of themselves as middle class. When it comes to politics, everybody likes to think of themselves as level-headed, common sense, no extreme on one side or the other. Right? If you pick that up in your teenage years, people don't like to be called extremists. That means you're like not part of the mainstream. You're odd, you're weird, you're extreme. So they put that label on Goldwater, and it stuck. So Johnson easily defeats him. And this is what the 64 election, quick look. Didn't have to freeze it this time.
And more blood. Today, as then, but more urgently and more broadly than then, the task of preserving and enlarging freedom at home and of safeguarding it from the forces of tyranny abroad is great enough to challenge all our resources and to require all our strength.
Notice how you can see the division in the party, right? Here's their nominee, and you've got some people clapping, some people are like, I like the Rockefeller guy better.
Anyone who joins us in all sincerity, we welcome. Those who do not care for our cause, we don't expect to enter our ranks in any case. And let our republicanism, so focused and so dedicated, not be made fussy and futile by unthinking and stupid labels. I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
So when the media reported that it was extremism is no vice, they left out extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. If we're not extreme in defending what we have, we're going to lose what we have. That's his message. But they twisted it. Nobody wants to be known as extremists. And 50 years later, 60 years later almost, those people that did not want to engage in the defense of liberty, now we deal with all kinds of concerns about our civil liberties. You with me? Anyway, much of the modern quote-unquote conservative movement, he's considered like the father of it, Barry Goldwater. Didn't get elected, was considered extreme, so he'd really be considered extreme in 21st century if he was considered extreme in 1960s. But remember, it's extremism in the defense of liberty, not just for the sake of being extreme. So here's what the results look like. Johnson, as they said, crushes Goldwater. Look at all that blue. And somebody want to make a comment on all the other maps we've shown. What do you think is unusual about this map? Can you remember all the other elections that we've shown over the last few weeks? Something strange has happened. Please tell me, at least a few of you have picked it up. Election of 1964. What's different? What?
That's super interesting.
Come on, somebody.
Texas. California.
Texas what?
It's blue.
Okay, not compared to today. This map compared to the 1960 election, the 1956 election, the 1952 election that we've shown, the 1948 election. There is a stark difference. McKenna,
The South is Republican instead of Democrat.
do you notice all the other elections? There was a lot of red, and then this was blue. Eisenhower, even the popular Ike, this was blue. This stretch from Louisiana to South Carolina. And now it's red. What's going on? What is going on? Any theories? Any idea? The whole time, why was this swath of states blue? 50, 48, 52, 56, 60. Why were those states always blue? What's that? Civil rights. And now 1964, haven't we been talking a lot about the civil rights issue coming to a head, right? That we're finally going to get legislation that closes all the loopholes for these states in the South. You with me? You have Goldwater winning the South. Johnson, they went against Johnson, the leading Democrat who picked up the torch for Kennedy. What else was happening leading up to 1964? What's the civil rights is an issue. What else is the major issue? The Cold War, right? So there's a kind of a shift in regional politics where the civil rights issues it's not going to be gone. We're going to be talking about a lot of riots, A lot of actual relations between blacks and whites aren't certainly not healed yet in 2022, right? And they certainly weren't healed by the legislation, but it was certainly done legislatively. So legally, it couldn't be done anymore. You still got a long way to go. We still got another generation to continue to work on the hearts of people to get racism out of our system. We've done very well over the last 60 years, believe it or not. Anyway, I'd like to talk about it more, but like I said, we got to get interesting that the South is red. And guess how long the South's been red? Pretty much ever since. Questions, comments? Here we go, Vietnam. February 1965, 9 U.S. soldiers are killed by the Viet Cong, and President Johnson orders bombing. Here we go. When did Vietnam start? Well, we had advisors there, again, since the mid-50s, trying to maintain the stability of the South Vietnamese government, and now is when it really starts. February 9th, 1965, there are 9 U.S. soldiers there that are there for intelligence gathering, for maintaining stability for the South Vietnam government, and they are killed by this group. Can you tell that's in italics? The Viet Cong. If you want to put it in your margin, the Viet Cong are a group of people from South Vietnam that are sympathetic to the communists. Okay, so just like in Korea, the North is communist, the South is trying to stand for Republican government, for freedom. In the South, you had people that were sympathetic to the communists. They were living in the South, but they wanted the communists to win. Kind of like if you go back to our revolution, right? You had people in the colonies that were loyalists, Tories, right? They were like, they didn't want to fight against the king. They wanted to keep, hey, long live the king. We're British. We don't want to separate from being British. So that's what's going on in South Vietnam. You got this group of people that are in South Vietnam, but they want the North to win. That makes things very difficult, wouldn't you say? Right? If you've got this geographic war like you had in Korea, where the people in the South were pretty much united in their fight against the North, now when our soldiers go into Vietnam, this is what they're facing. We're trying to save South Vietnam from North Vietnamese soldiers, right? Add to that, we don't know who among us, because there's so many of them, that are part of this group. They're like in our midst. We're not all geographically united here where we can just freely go about and say, hey, we're all striving. Like in Ukraine right now, I'm sure there's few, but there's very little talk of people in Ukraine wanting Russia to win, right? Imagine the soldiers in Ukraine having to deal with their neighbors like going against them too. That's what our soldiers were facing in Vietnam. We had to fight against the North Army, and then we had to figure out who is even on our side when we're in the jungles in South Vietnam. Because you had this huge organization called the Viet Cong who were supporting the North. Does that all make sense? So this is the beginning. Johnson orders the bombing, strategic bombing at first. And then a month later, Johnson orders a continued bombing campaign. And U.S. Marines land in South Vietnam. The war is on. Ho Chi Minh is the president of, let's see what they call him. We'll call him president of North Vietnam. So this Ho Chi Minh Trail was a pipeline from North Vietnam into South Vietnam, but they went through the neighboring countries of Laos and Cambodia to have avenues, channels to get to South Vietnam. Many branches to this trail. and it was a constant movement of troops. Again, how did that happen? Because you had the North trying to invade the South, being helped by Viet Cong, who were already in the South. So this trail developed because they were constantly being supported, not just traveling from the North, being supported by people from the South. Does that all make sense? So who's the Viet Cong? Somebody answer it for me then, if it all makes sense. Who is this group called the Viet Cong? Yeah. Southern Vietnamese.
Yeah.
Yeah, who were sympathizing with the North Communist cause. What? Great. So I was going to show you the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I guess we won't. Maybe some other time. 50,000 troops sent to Vietnam in July. 35,000 drafted per month. We went from a few hundred advisors to now we send Marines to 2 months later, we're sending 50,000 troops to, at the same time, while we're sending those troops, 35,000 young men are being drafted every month. So those that were 18 had to make sure they were registered to be drafted. We go to August. The U.S. makes its first offensive. And we're successful. And then the first U.S. engagement where, hi there. Surely. What country did you do?
Australia.
Australia. What we got there?
Bananas.
Banana puffs. Thanks, mate. Did anybody do Australia in 5th grade? Mackenzie did Australia. Thank you very much, Debbie. You got any nuggets of cool information you learned from Australia? What's the most interesting thing you learned when you researched Australia? You guys both did Australia?
No, I did. I learned a really weird fact about my country.
What's your country?
I mean, I'm Irish dancer.
You do Irish dance? You can do it right now? Did you ever watch the thing on like YouTube, that Irish line dancers? No? Yeah, you're fine. Wait, pen.
The most interesting fact I learned is that they're baby teeth when they see when it falls down, they plant the seeds, and they think when the tree grows, their teeth grow too.
They put when they lose their teeth, instead of putting it under their pillow, they plant. Wow! That's better than a pinch to throw it in there. Thank you, Australia. You inspire me. Not enough. Just a little bit.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Not as good as you.
That's because your game got competition.
I'm supposed to play at Stop Field.
See, my brother's good there. Mr. Franken, what country is that from?
Australia, mate.
My brother made a flatbread. I helped.
From where?
Tanzania.
Tanzania. Yes.
I just saw a week and I was like,
Yep.
I didn't know.
Did you get one of these?
Yeah, I tried. It was
Whoa, more stuff. What country is this? Papua New Guinea.
You should give me one.
Move, I want to find my thing.
Did anybody do Papua New Guinea in 5th grade?
Oh.
What is that? What's Papua New Guinea?
I did Peru.
What'd you do?
I did,
I remember.
Oh, what country?
um,
Honduras. Anybody do Honduras? Anybody do Peru? Anybody do Jordan? Israel? Please, could hit lights, please.
I feel like somebody's like,
Maddie. What page is that? Oh, I'm so offended.
it's a banana. Banana.
Wait, what is that?
It's an Australian banana.
Seats and desist.
My first is third.
Remember,
I was
you have available help. Your activity period. Lexi has volunteered to help you.
Miss Frank, can I have one? Mr. Frank, it's on your favorite student.
Lexi, will you take like 2 or 3?
Like right now?
No.
Yeah.
Miss Frank,
Wait,
can I
when
have
am I doing it?
It's up to
Can
them.
you guys please, like,
Listen up.
take my rest of my hours for nothing else? Like, obviously, but like, I really need.
What she means to say is her main motivation is to help you do better at math. But secondarily, she actually gets help with this too. It's a
Yeah, I
win-win.
get to finish my senior hours, which I do need to do. And
So extra motivation, if you were a little bit awkward about, I don't know if I want to admit I need help. And I'm not sure about this Lexi girl. She looks kind of mean. If you were worried about that, now you've got extra motivation that you getting help would help her.
you have no choice.
That's right.
anything?
I'm half up. I. It's an extra. No, there's nothing.